Benchmarking 101, your foundation for success. Finding your comp set. If you're not looking at the right competitors, you're not driving the right decisions. And we find this when we work with partners, right? Because you, especially in major markets, but even in smaller markets, you have pockets of neighborhoods that are different. You have different types of inventory that behaves very differently. So if you're not benchmarking or looking at the right views, you might not be making the right decisions to optimize revenue. So some examples of this, right? Like inventory type matters. If I look at all 3 bedrooms in a market, it might be a miss because a 3-bedroom house might be very different than a 3-bedroom condo. And so obviously Wheelhouse offers the ability to unlock this kind of view and detail. And so understanding the questions to ask could help you, right, go into Wheelhouse and get what you need. Another tips and trick here is when you think about, well, does it matter or not? How do people search? I think it matters maybe that their homes on one side of a river or the other side of a river. And talking to your Vrbo or Airbnb market manager, if you have access to the channel partner, it can help you get those kind of insights. Like when people search, are they likely to search this and this together or not? Is it the same consideration set? And then you can get a sense of like backing up. I think it matters. Does it matter? And getting that kind of top of funnel data from them can be really helpful if they're willing to share.
So I love that, Heather. So and when we were building this, you were talking about that. So you're saying I can go to my market manager and I could reach out to someone at Vrbo or Airbnb and they'll give me information about search patterns. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Does Com do that? Are there other teams that do that too? I like that as a kind of a fun hack.
Yeah, so this kind of leads to a little bit of a top of funnel discussion, right? And whether or not they'll share with you exact detail, depends maybe on who you're dealing with. But directionally, I know Vrbo's typically very helpful, right? Like they can at least share some insight that like, yes, that does matter and just validate. But staying with top of funnel, some other things to think about there, are, do you want to look at airline data? If you're an island destination, there are ways you can get access to airline data. I know Key Data is a great partner to Wheelhouse. Some of you may know Key Data acquired a company called Demand IQ. Demand IQ helps you look at that shopping insights on your own website. So that goes beyond Google Analytics, and you can see how many people shop this arrival and departure, or how many people shop for this filter on this amenity. And like you might find like that hot tub, every single time someone is searching for that hot tub on a 4-bedroom. And that will just, again, give you insights to like what matters, right? That top of funnel data. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, Andrew, but maybe just a little more detail on that.
All the tips that you found are going to be helpful and fun, but it's funny, I work in the revenue management space and I hadn't thought about calling the Vrbo market manager and saying, hey, what are you seeing on top of the demand funnel? Some of these channels have historically shared some data with you. Sometimes that's only something they provide to larger customers. But I think also a way maybe to sneak into, if you do want to reach out to your Vrbo market manager, maybe a way to approach it is saying, hey, I'm thinking about expanding my portfolio in this market. What data can you provide to help me? And I'd love to work with Vrbo on that. So some hacks to maybe get some good top of the funnel data would be great, or hopefully helpful. And then I do think, we love the Key Data team, and the Predict IQ is a really nice add to their tool set of helping people figure out where bookings are occurring. So nice add there.
Yeah, just on those lines of top of funnel. So I guess I'll just kind of close this line with this key point, right? Putting in the work to get it right really matters. And once you have that in place, you're looking at the right views to inform the right strategy. All right. So custom CompSets, you can look at the market and then how customized you go. So obviously you want to understand your relative market positioning. Do you have super luxury homes? So then you would say, well, obviously you're going to always edge higher end. Do you have a mixed portfolio, right? Kind of getting a sense of your market positioning of like your brand. Gaining granular diagnostics to solve specific problems. So you know where you stand. Now, by having these custom views, you can get really specific, right? And then this is where the incremental revenue is going to come from. And then an example we gave here, right? Once you have views into that data, maybe you'll find little takeaways that you didn't realize were even there. So maybe you find that somebody in your competition is getting midweek occupancy that you're not getting. So once you diagnose this is a problem and this might be where you're losing, then this is where you kick into kind of that commercial level. How do you go about figuring out how to solve that? There's clearly midweek demand. How do you get some of that? Maybe we'll talk about some more examples later on. So best practices. As you're selecting these custom CompSets, we talked about, obviously home versus condo, number of beds, and then you can continue to go more granularly, right, into like amenities, more specific location. But ultimately, this first bullet point here, you want to make sure it's statistically significant, right? And that broader is typically better. If you go as few as just selecting 10 other homes versus selecting 20 or 50, and you might find in a market this is hard to do. If you have some large homes, there may not be that many of them. And it might be that you want to create a view of, say, 15 to 20 other large homes in the market. The other thing here in bullet point number 3 is staying with that like unique accommodation. You might find you're competing with multiple markets. A great example of this multiple market is island destinations or the Caribbean. When people are shopping the Caribbean, they're not necessarily decided yet on what island. They might be looking for beachfront 7-bedroom. And in that sense, you might say, I actually want to kind of create a view of this bedroom type across a few different islands. And that is who you're competing with because that's how the consideration and shopping and buying process works for the customer.
I love this tip. Heather, I just want to double click on this because there was a big announcement from Airbnb yesterday where there's kind of a new type of search they're introducing. And that type of search is you say, I want to go to exactly what Heather just described, a beachfront location. And they'll show you beachfront locations across countries, across a globe, literally. So there is an emergent pattern here of people searching. They're actually less tied to going to a particular destination. They're more tied to a particular inventory type. And the assumption is it's easy enough to get anywhere in the world now that they can kind of show this inventory type in a collective search. So this was something that Heather pointed out that you might want to look across multiple markets. The more unique your accommodation is, the more likely you're going to fall into that type of search where people are saying, I want a tree house or a yurt or a beachfront or a mountainfront destination. Like really interesting new search pattern evolving. That's going to change how people have to think about their comp set. I thought that was a really fun ad, Heather, that you put here that Airbnb amplified just yesterday. So
yeah, it really and you're right. And how the customer shopping experience will be enabled will lend to like different ways we think about our competition. So yeah. And I guess on that note, the supply being fluid is another aspect of that, whether you're looking at just in your market or you've expanded and you see more supply popping up in competitor markets. An important part of custom CompSets is that you're monitoring them on a somewhat regular basis. And there isn't an exact answer to this. It could be once a quarter, it could be, twice a year, or it could be something that you just do once a year to say, how much has supply changed? I'm comparing myself to every 3-bed condo in this radius, and then I've selected them all that I want. But maybe then again, at a 6-month mark or 1-year mark, you look again, did it go from 50 to 70? Did 20 new 3 beds come into the rental pool, right, in your market? And just being aware of how that supply is fluctuating. So this last bullet point, CompSets versus market reports. A common thing we saw through COVID in many markets was the condo versus home. And so if you had just condos, you might have found that you weren't seeing the same like accelerated growth as a home. So if you created a view of condo comp sets, and that's all you looked at, and you didn't look at the market, you might not realize that there is more demand coming in. It's just that the condos were at a disadvantage. And that, the theory is right, that tied to like social distancing scoring of homes are more attractive than condos. But the message here is just don't lose track of the whole story. Maybe your market isn't down, just that specific unit type might be down. And then, you can navigate that, right? What are strategies you can put in place? So.
Saying, yes, build a comp set, compare yourself to the comp set, but also make sure that you're comparing yourself to the market as well. Is that?
Yeah, like I can say, because like maybe those condos is like, you know what, my 2-bed condos are flat year over year in the month of May, right? But if the market maybe is up 10% or 15%, and then that, right? So it gives you the relativity to, all right, then maybe it's also informs like, well, do you want to go, you maybe want to go after different homes to grow your portfolio in the market. That's a more attractive type of inventory, right? But you understand the whole story. It's just making sure the whole narrative is there.
Yep. Love it.
And again, like obviously with Wheelhouse, we have the screenshot here, and I think we're going to jump over to talk about this, like how you would go about it. You won't lose sight of the market. The market is there, but then the ability to still see these CompSet specific views. So some ideas, just diving a little deeper, hyper local, right? Like neighborhoods can matter. Like in a big market like Orlando, we experienced this with a partner. Like it's not all the same, and we recognized this market needed a different perspective, and that you wouldn't have thought, right? But within a mile or 2 miles sometimes really matters in some of the major markets. Aspirational competitors is another best practice. So you think, well, my units are kind of middle of the road. So if you pick all like middle of the road units, you might be missing out on what the potential is. So to be able to have something aspirational in there that's like, well, the nicer units are X, because this helps you play the occupancy rate game. You could say, well, can I achieve the same total revenue on my unit that isn't super brand new as the brand new unit can? And the answer is yes. You just might have to play a different game. It might have to be you win because you can achieve a higher OCC with a lower rate. But ultimately, maybe you can generate the same amount of revenue on that unit as the nicer unit. So that's the theory around, the philosophy around aspirational views. Seasonal, summer, winter, if you're ski in, ski out condos, what matters? So this could be a potential for you if you have extreme seasonality. Weekend versus weekday. This might be a little more of a major market like a Nashville, where especially as corporate travel is coming back, you could see an opportunity to, just completely different customer base opportunities that you want to look at. And then the out of market listings, like we talked about with the Caribbean example, is really think about your unique homes, especially. Are they competing with other destinations because it's someone searching for that type of experience in home or accommodation? Is there anything to add? Yeah, jump in.
I guess you had mentioned, so let's say I identify a problem. So I know my portfolio has a particular weakness, such as, let's keep with the example of weekdays. And yet when I go and build a comp set, I start to identify that there are competitors doing a great job of selling their weekdays near me. How can I action on that? What are some of the, let's unlock that a little bit. What might I do? Should I find out that, okay, it's not my whole market. Well, maybe my market occupancy is lower on weekdays. It's quite common. But if there are winners, like how can I go learn from those people? What should I be doing to drive that particular performance metric?
Yeah, I mean, you could get into like guerrilla tactics, right? Like, who do you know that could talk to so-and-so that can like really try to figure out what that company's doing? Mm-hmm. Do you try to bump into the actual guests at some point? That's like real guerrilla tactics. But ultimately, we can start to look through the data a little bit more too, right? Like if you can get your hands on some of that top of funnel data, You might get a sense of who are these, where are they coming from? What are the lengths of stay? Is it that they're getting like 3 and 4 week stays and we're not getting any of that? Is it that they have, is there other types of partnerships they have with travel agencies, insurance claims adjusters, other venues, like maybe corporate retreat venues? Like, how do you get to like, what do they have that's giving them midweek business? And you could try to find more in the data, as well as like their guerrilla tactics, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because we recently launched CompSets. And one of the first learnings we've had in a couple of weeks is that people actually really want to be able to split out weekend and weekday occupancy more easily, right? And right now you could export your data and you could run your own analysis, but let's be honest, it could be simpler than that. So I think there's for folks who are listening and joining us, whatever cut of data that you want, because what Heather's pointed out is like, go find the weaknesses in your portfolio. Find nearby properties that might actually have a strength in that. Try to learn from them. But any cuts of data that would be helpful to you all, we'd love to hear about, because it's, this is a way, what Heather's teaching you is a way to find and analyze and address the weaknesses. And we want to be able to help too. So I think I was really curious about how to address the problem that I think a lot of folks have, which is how do you sell your weekdays more effectively? And you did point out a couple ways to do it, but for those who are listening to us again, like think about, like your portfolio will have a weakness. And as we'll see as we step into RevPAR indexing, even if you're performing really strong, there are ways you can continue to improve. I just think this is one of the scalpels you can use to dissect your portfolio in really interesting ways to find a path to the solution. So I like these, and the out of market listing one again, I think is so interesting because almost like you were highlighting this aspirational comps that you might want to go find the high performers in you. Out of market listings, you might, again, if you have a unique property, you might want to go learn from a unique property in another market and see how they're marketing and see what they're doing, because again, they're attracting demand that wasn't expecting to be there necessarily. It's kind of wild.
Yeah. And it really ties to, like you said, how Airbnb, and will be interesting to watch the other channels, how they're guiding like the customer search and buying process. So, yeah,
I think, Heather, so I'm curious a little bit about, so theoretically, Google obviously has a search information for where people, usually when you're searching like island destinations, you go to Google, and then people have historically honed in their searches afterward on like, oh, I found this great place, Barbados. I'm going to go now look on Airbnb or Vrbo, etc. So theoretically, I have to see that, or I have to believe that other search engines or OTAs are going to kind of adjust to this philosophy as well. Like I kind of think this is the start of something pretty, a meaningful trend shift in how demand emerges in markets, but maybe I'm getting too excited about it.
No. I think it's right. And the COVID rebound, and what does it mean for all of travel? So what are the airlines going to do, right? Like we know that they offer you, like, are your dates flexible too? If you travel one day earlier or one day later, how, if you're flying versus driving, how much is it tying to like airfare fluctuations? And, understanding like when people are just making a decision about their trip, are they like, oh, okay, I can go to Maui or I can go to Kauai, but the flight is so much cheaper to Maui than Kauai, so I'm just going to choose Maui, right? Like, how does that all play out, right? But ultimately, it's like, oh, is it worth it to pay a little more to Kauai because I want this accommodation,
right?
So all those factors. But it's easier. It's like the technology has made it easier for customers, like, to have that flexibility and like be able to compare their travel decisions in ways like that we've never had before.
It's a whole new game.
Yeah, whole new game. Good way to say it.